to this story now. Judgment is expected in the child sex ring case against Gerhard Ackerman. The court heard disturbing accounts of how young boys between the ages of 14 and 16 were abused. Ackerman faces over 700 counts of rape, attempted murder, as well as sex trafficking. He's pleaded not guilty to all charges. Our reporter Heidi Giokos continues to monitor proceedings from court for us, and she joins us yet again. Heidi, what is the very latest coming from court that side?
Yes, Mfundo, as I mentioned to you earlier, of course, a very disturbing matter here. Judgment will be handed down. We do know that Gerhard Ackerman is facing over 700 charges, a very disturbing matter. But I think let's get more perspective. We are joined by Luke Lamprecht, who's from the Women Men Against Child Abuse. Thank you so much for your time, Luke. We do appreciate it. Obviously, a very disturbing story. He's been on trial for some time. But let's speak about the fact that he basically represented himself and the charges he's facing and what he actually conceded to before the court.
So the first thing that is interesting in this case is that very often accused people don't testify in their own defense. So he had a legal aid advocate, but he chose to testify in his own defense. And he's facing charges of sexual trafficking, exploitation, rape, sexual assault, child pornography in the 700s. So the multiple charges. Within the context of the trial, what happened was one or two of the charges fell away because the state didn't present evidence. But for the rest of it, like the fact that he rented out boys, took a percentage of what the boys were getting paid, had transport for them, had homes for them where the abuse would happen, etc. He basically was saying, well, if you're 16, you're allowed to consent to it. These boys all knew what they were doing. The parents seemed to have known what was going on. I've not really done anything wrong, and you know, this is very prominent within the gay male community. This is what he's done. And even at some levels, he denied, you know, sort of a psychological denial of some of the acts even being sexual acts. For example, oral sex for him wasn't a sexual act.
Yeah, very disturbing. I want, before we speak about the victims and what this is going to mean for them today, given that judgment is going to be handed down, I just want to speak about what we can expect today, because these are serious charges. You're saying it's obviously running into the 700s. It's not the first trial or matter that Ackerman is facing and needs to present himself in court. It's obviously a very serious matter, and given what's happening in this country around sexual assaults, GBV, all of that stuff, it's obviously a very disturbing one, and given his demeanor and just the way he behaved in his trial.
He was entirely belligerent in court. I mean, at times the judge had to say to him, this is not a shebeen. He was sort of commenting while people were giving evidence. I mean, he just behaved really badly. And frankly, when he arrived here after he was arrested at Narbel, he actually looked very bad as well, you know. And I think the thing for us is that we are really wanting, in this case, as Women and Men Against Child Abuse, a life sentence. The reason for the life sentence is because life sentences have an impact on parole. We're having huge issues with the parole system at the moment, releasing very complicated, very dangerous people without any rehabilitation, remorse, etc. It's a scary, scary thing. So at least if we get a life sentence, which I'm hoping the judge is going to hand down, that life sentence will mean that he can only apply for parole in 25 years. That's the implication. And in addition to that, it has to go to the minister. If he gets 25 years, that means he can apply for parole after a period served, 2/3 of his sentence, and that is just the parole board. It doesn't have to be overseen by the minister. So we really want this to be a life sentence for, you know, obviously for the fact that we believe it's appropriate, but secondly that there's some kind of monitoring over the parole system that is higher than the parole board itself.
Certainly. Before we get into what this means for the victims, I want to quickly touch on the second accused in this particular matter. We do know that he has committed suicide, but he was obviously also accused of these horrible crimes.
So that was Advocate Paul Kennedy. So it was Ackerman and Kennedy who were on trial. One was a customer, which was the advocate, and a very high-profile advocate. And what happened in this case is that they split the defense. In other words, one defense defended Ackerman, another one defended Kennedy. And when it came to the blood tests, so the state called for blood tests to be taken, and those blood tests included HIV because that's something that can be done in sexual offence matters. And the minute moment those blood tests came out, that's when the suicide happened. The problem is, though, that we have another 160 men out there somewhere who are clients of Ackerman who have misused these boys and boys historically, because Ackerman has been around for a very long time. He has faced charges and cases dating back decades in other provinces. He's facing another trial in the Alex Court, which happened in the late, I think, 2018, 2019. So, I mean, he's a prolific person, and the people that he has had as customers, I would like to know who they are, because if they've done nothing wrong according to him and his evidence, where are they, and why don't we know who they are so we can ask them what their story is? Because it makes it, I mean, it's quite devastating that we've got these high profile people running around like advocates, and in the back of it, they are going and renting out these very, very, very vulnerable boys.
So tragic. It actually makes you feel sick. Just lastly, the victims obviously very young, a lot of them very traumatized, scarred for life, basically. Their evidence before the court was in camera because of their age and the sensitivity around this. It's obviously not easy for them, but as you mentioned, their life sentence would be a vindication for these boys and their families, especially because that what has been done to you was not right, especially because you're so young, you're so confused.
Well, the first thing is that the reason we know about this is one of the children came forward and said something's wrong here. This is not how things should be. So it was a victim who came forward looking for help. Now, in the defence, so you've got legal defence, which I've explained, you've got psychological defence, denial of fact, denial of impact, denial of responsibility, all of which has been used by Ackerman. And what that does is it transfers the shame and the blame to the victim. Now, if the judge makes a judgment where he says Ackerman is wrong and Kennedy was wrong and these boys were victims, at least the boys can be, they can be relieved of some of the guilt and shame that comes with being a sexual assault victim, especially a boy of other men. Okay, so that for me is a really important psychological concept, but still they will need support for sexuality, for their health, for their mental health going forward, because the trial is only the starting point of their healing. The judgment is the next part, the sentencing is the next part, and then there's still parole that has to be fought at some point. So this thing will follow them for a long period of time, because we're involved in parole cases now where years and years down the line we have got the victims having to go back to the parole board to say why the parolees shouldn't get parole. So this is a thing that sort of goes through your life forever. So we have to create a supportive environment around them. And finally, I think for me, I've been doing this for over 30 years now, and the father of the initial victim's evidence was devastating. I mean, it was just so sad, because he has a father and his 16-year-old son. They are in some rural Free State town, and the boy comes and says, I found this job opportunity online. I want to make something of my life. And Dads, I'm not sure, but we're struggling a bit financially. And we end up in this position where these very vulnerable boys and the father who's in, now the father feels guilty. I should have protected my child. Now there's a rupture in that relationship, and that's the system that should support the child. So we're hoping that through the evidence that's given, and we're hoping obviously that the judge is going to accept all of the evidence and find him guilty, because he hasn't really denied very much, that they will then be able to say, yes, these are very, very clever people who we call them career offenders. They choose jobs that give them access to children, and they make a career of abusing children. And they're very clever. It's not that we did something wrong. They're just clever. These are very, very clever criminals, these.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Luke. I really do appreciate it. And thank you for the work you do. I think it's important to also highlight that. Thank you so much. And Mfundo, as I mentioned, we'll be hearing at 10 o'clock judgments. I must just reiterate how really traumatic the story is. I can't even begin to imagine what the victims are going through. But as you heard from Luke, an important day for them to hear what exactly the judge finds.
Indeed, very traumatic. Heidi, thank you very much for that. That's our reporter, Heidi Giokos, monitoring that case for us. Judgment is expected at 10.